Energy is the one thing that we have a finite amount of. And where we direct that energy. Are we getting a return on that energy? Is that energy impactful? If we're thinking about the same thing, we have a problem. We're thinking about it, our brain loves habits. It loves patterns. It loves processing things, but it can be very inefficient because the emotions get involved. And when our emotions get involved, we tend to kind of recycle the same thought time and time again.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley in partnership with Leumitech, sponsored by Homeward Ventures, Hippo Insurance, Upwest Labs, Synergy Global, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, Birthright Excel, Serona Partners, and in media partnership with CTech. Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. This is a very special episode, really all about leadership in very, very unique ways. Meet Vivian James Rigney, President and CEO of Inside Us LLC, a global executive coaching consultancy operating throughout 5 continents, where he has helped implement leadership development initiatives for some of the world's leading companies and their executive teams. He has also climbed the 7 summits, the highest peak on all 7 continents. On March 8th, his book Naked at the Knife Edge was published, a book about his climbing of Everest and an epic story of fear, resilience, and the power of vulnerability. I'm really excited to talk to you about leadership, as simple and as complex as it may be. Having climbed the 7 summits and with an amazing book coming out, I believe just recently, given when this publication is, so we'll act as if it has already come out, and talking about adversity and talking about defeating challenges, all in the context also of leadership and you as a professional coach and running some, helping phenomenal CEOs and phenomenal organizations become their best leaders that they can be, and the president of Inside Us. So Vivian, over these 20 minutes, I'm excited to tap into your stories of climbing the 7 summits, you as a coach, and understanding better for myself as a young entrepreneur. What does it mean to be a good leader in your eyes? Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, I think the core and the premise of the book is that climbing Everest is a metaphor for how to overcome challenges, but the most important thing to be an effective leader, and there are obviously lots of leadership books on how to lead, how to influence people, how to have impact, and all of those very important things. But it really starts with yourself and that level of self-awareness. One has to be aware of yourself. One has to make peace with yourself. One has to understand how to disarm the ego, how to be very aware of a persona that is unhealthy. So an ego that's unhealthy, a persona that's unhealthy. Again, coming back to the core, coming back to yourself. And that's the premise of the book is based on that's the starting point. When we are in a good place with ourselves, then we can help other people. Then we can impact other people. Then we can be aware of other people. We can understand what's happening around us. And a lot of people I work with, very smart, very talented, seasoned, experienced, very dynamic, lots of ideas, great energy. But a lot of them can overthink. And when they overthink, they're burning an inordinate amount of energy. And that's energy that could be used elsewhere. And this idea of clarity in their mind, reducing the inner dialogue in their mind, and allowing them to be much more intuitive, much more aware of what's happening around them, and at the same time being authentic. So that coming from an authentic place, from a genuine, authentic place. And in doing that, you have to be at peace with yourself. You have to have that inner. You have to be that inner rock. And this, if we think of the corporate world, and we think of it also with sports. If you're an athlete, if you're in the Olympics, coaches are training people to get out of their heads, to get what they call in the zone. And in business and corporate nowadays, we're hearing much more about mindfulness, much more about being present. It's the same premise. So the sporting world is teaching a lot of aspects of how to find that zone and find that place so we can influence at scale. The difference with the corporate world is we're leading folks, is we're leading at scale. We're getting others to do things that we cannot physically do ourselves.
Right.
And that's the challenge.
And so if we're looking back to the foundation of what you're talking about here, it's our ability to intentionally be at peace with ourselves, be genuine, be authentic, and only when we're able to harness that, we're able to then help others and lead by examples. I'm looking at, the various people that may be listening here, including myself, and the different places where we are in life. And obviously none of us are 100% genuine, 100% at peace with ourselves, and it's a constant struggle. But how do I know myself, Michael, what I need to be even working on? How do I know to identify and be first honest with myself where I'm not being honest with myself?
When we think of where we're putting our energy is the one thing that we have a finite amount of. And where we direct that energy, are we getting a return on that energy? Is that energy impactful? If we're thinking about the same thing, we have a problem. We're thinking about it, our brain loves habits. It loves patterns. It loves processing things, but it can be very inefficient because the emotions get involved. And when our emotions get involved, we tend to kind of recycle the same thought time and time again. So we may think of a problem or a situation. If there are emotions attached with that, we can go into what we call a spiral, and that can take a lot of energy. So we're not solving anything. We're just thinking about the same thing time and time again. That's gross inefficiency. And when we allow those situations come into our minds, and again, with senior execs or leaders, they're quite lonely in a way because they can't necessarily be sharing everything, what's happening, what their concerns or worries are with people around them. They're supposed to lead. People look up to them. Their board expects them to be solid, expects them to be clear-minded. Of course, they can ask for mentors and so forth, but a lot of it is in their heads. So you could imagine if somebody is really festering on a problem is festering in their minds, or they're spinning, or they're not getting into a productive place, it's incredibly wasteful. And it also means it shuts their mind down to picking up what's happening around them, what the reality is, looking forward more, balancing their intuition with the data, and distilling that down into, being decisive where decisiveness is necessary. If you don't have enough information, understand what you're missing, how to get that. But there's a time where decisions have to be made as well. And that peace of mind is so important, particularly when everything is moving fast. And that efficiency becomes dramatic in terms of impact.
So it's not just about us being authentic and genuine with ourselves so that others want to be led by us, but it's also impacting our ability to make good, thoughtful, intentional decisions in the moment, both immediate that require decision making, but also other decisions that require us to understand what pieces are we missing and have that clarity of mind and have that peace to go and explore those options to make a good decision. Vivian, tell me a little bit about climbing the 7 summits and specifically Mount Everest. Does that play into your coaching and your thinking process through what it means to be a good leader?
Everest is a great metaphor because it's the obviously tallest mountain in the world, but it's incredibly technical and detailed, and there are so many uncontrollables. So I went there. I was super fit. I was strong. I climbed tall mountains before. I was prepared. Now, at the same time, I've always had a fear of heights. So there was something in the back of my mind that was, definitely anxiety. I was going in there anxious, but the ego was driven. You've done tall mountains before, put your head down. You'll figure it out, and you're good at grinding things out when you're in tough positions. When I got there, and 2 months on the mountain, so it's a massive undertaking. You can imagine. 2 months and 3 rotations to get to the summit of Everest. Rotation 1, first of all, you go about 10 days into base camp to acclimatize. Base camp is your base, but that's at 16,000 feet. That's about 5,700 meters. So it's already very, very high. So you already have issues of breathing the moment you arrive at base camp. That improves over time as your red blood cells propagate. But then it's rotation 1 is where you go all the way up to Kumbuai's Fall to Camp 1, Camp 2, then all the way back to base camp, carrying supplies along the way, acclimatizing along the way, dealing with obstacles along the way. Then you wait a week or 10 days. Then you go all the way up to Camp 1, Camp 2, Camp 3, more acclimatization, moving supplies up there, then all the way back to Camp 1, base camp. At that point, that's about 5 weeks in. My body was emaciated. Most of us were emaciated. Your body starts consuming muscle, consuming all the fat because you're not able to digest at that altitude. So then we go down into the valley a few thousand feet or like 1,000 meters or so for a few days, and we eat as much as we can. We sleep as much as we can, recover our body to a degree, back to base camp, open up our laptops, and then the fun starts. Then it's really thinking about weather patterns, because there's only about 5 to 7 days in a climbing season one can summit Everest, where the jet stream moves back from the summit and there's an ability to attempt the summit. And then we wait, and then when the weather window is there, then we make the move for the third rotation. And the third rotation is all the way up through those same camps, 1, 2, 3, 4, and if we're lucky, 5 is the summit, and then back down again. So it's an incredible journey of obstacles, of things you cannot control. And I think that's the whole take on this, Michael, is that our egos break down, because the ego is of no use when you're hanging on the side of Everest at 8,000 meters, saying, I can do it. There's a point where your body doesn't believe that anymore, and you know that. So you become very naked and very exposed very quickly. And the persona of worrying about what other people think of you, that's irrelevant, because you're there with yourself. You have a few colleagues, but everyone is there. So that idea of being extremely vulnerable and recognizing what that feeling is to be that exposed. And the question then is, who are you in that position? Mm. And those questions, and the book is quite descriptive of the question in my mind was, why are you here?
Wow.
And that was a powerful question that needed answering at the time.
Those periods of time between the rotations where you're sitting, you're acclimatizing, you're in the process, you're not advancing, you're in the middle, you're not advancing on an hourly or daily basis, and you know that you're in sort of a waiting period when you've come to conquer this feat. What are those days like? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Obviously, also as a high-paced executive that is, really usually going to push things forward. What happens when you're sitting down and you have a few days where you're like, okay, now I'm recovering. Now I'm waiting.
Yeah, those days are actually bad days, because on the mountain, the bad days are days when you don't have things to do. So on those days, we go for little walks or we prepare our gear, but there are days of reflection and days where you really feel how tired you are. You see your rib cage, how emaciated you become. And in my experience, those days, about a couple of weeks into the expedition, I got down actually for a few days. And I got down because what entered my mind was, wow, I'm actually here and my life is at risk. And if something happens to me, I fall down a crevasse or I slip off an ice ledge, and that's the end of me. How will people back there, the people I care about, remember me? And up to that point, I'd never really thought of that. I was too busy achieving, I was driving, I was succeeding, I was proving, I was all the time going forward with this huge level of doing more, experiencing more. And for those days in the tent, I remember thinking, well, will they remember me for what I achieved or how I made them feel? And of course, the answer was the former. It was what I would have achieved, not enough of how I would have made them feel. So that was a profound a wake-up call for me. And that came back to haunt me on Summit Day, where I really asked that question, that's not how I want to live my life, because it won't be meaningful to others, which means what's the whole purpose of what I'm doing? If I'm not going to be around, what's the purpose of being here, right? A legacy is something you want to make the world a better place to some degree with people you care about. That's fulfillment. Doing it in the moment. And if something happened to me, for them to remember me because of that, and they could continue that. So this was me at 39 years old, facing these pretty deep life questions of what's the meaning of life and who am I? And the pressure of Everest it's so claustrophobic in a way, because there's no escape from that. You can't talk your way out of it. Your brain doesn't believe it anymore. You are, as I say, very naked. And again, going back to leadership and coaching, most leaders are quite naked on the inside. Very few of them ask for help. And there's this idea of failure, a fear of failure. If I ask for help, I might be perceived as being weak. If I admit some of my, weaknesses, that might be something that others will look down on or take advantage of. And yes, you don't have to share everything with everybody, but there's a degree of authenticity that comes with asking for help and being human, and finding that balance as a leader. They're the leaders that make a difference. A guy called Richard Branson, incredibly famous global. He mixes that idea of he's good at what he does, and he has exceptional people around him completing the circle. And he can be playful, he can be profound, he can be curious, he can be very driven, he can be all of those things. But the one thing that comes out of that is an authenticity that inspires followership. And it's interesting. I think if you were to ask him along the way, how are you doing, Richard? His answer is, I'm doing quite well. He finds fulfillment in being himself. Right. And in Everest, I found that was the holy grail that I came down the mountain with. I just want to find that space with me. And then other people around me will probably benefit from that. But I've got to find it first.
How does that translate into the daily life? So as we're progressing, especially in tech, and the companies are growing, and putting aside all the societal pressures, and we're looking at what's happening with media, and especially over the last few years with the insane valuations and the crazy expectations of delivering value in unprecedented speeds and time. How do we as leaders at that point know to balance that and to maintain this intentionality and maintain this idea that at the end, what we are humans, we are seeking fulfillment. And if we are fulfilled, we'll actually be able to bring back and do better for the world because we'll make better decisions and we'll be better humans.
I think the connection it's very important for people not to get caught up in the bubble and to get caught up in their own bubble in their own world. So how to be grounded, how to have that connection with whether it be customers, whether it be society, whether it be, and having that that where one can be highly innovative, one could be pushing the boundaries, one can be, having the greatest innovation ever and that great mindset and great culture, but one has to be connected also with the world that we serve, and on a tech side, with customers, and understanding that. How does one embroider? I think the most successful companies are the ones where the person, the individual using the service or the app or whatever it may be, they feel connected to that brand. They feel as though that brand, there's a value in it, there's a connection, there's a loyalty, those values are intertwined. And I think successful companies are the ones where they can match that exceptional ingenuity, innovation with a feeling of being connected and being thoughtful about that. And how do you do that in your organization? How do you do that as a CEO? How do you nurture that? Because it doesn't happen on its own. It has to be thoughtful. It has to be purposeful. Mm-hmm. And again, bringing those two things together, and that obviously it has followership, but it promotes an extremely healthy culture, a culture that's that can be humble, but extremely ambitious, extremely driven. And that humility is almost like you become the lamp and not the moth. The moth is busy trying too hard, where people come to you. And that's an honesty of thought and purpose. And there's a purity there that the best leaders and the best companies find. And it's wonderful to see because the meaningfulness comes through it.
So Vivian, I'm going on a walk in about 2 hours, and I'm going to have about an hour to think. And I was planning on doing my usual routine, listening to Broadway songs on Spotify and not thinking too much. But I do want to think, and I want to be intentional, and I want to challenge myself, not on Everest, but here on the boardwalk next to the beach. What are some questions that you advise CEOs that you work with, or in this situation, me, to think through in that relatively short but important time that I'm going to be reflecting for myself? What should I be asking myself and reflecting for myself so that I can begin a process of being more intentional and being more fulfilled?
I think the most valuable exercise that I do for execs is to get them to listen to what their mind is saying, listen to their inner dialogue. So as humans, we process about 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day. And 98% of those would be the same thoughts. So our brain tends to repeat itself again and again and again. And the emotions tend to drive a lot of our decisions. So if you were taking that walk, I would, instead of you putting more burdens on yourself, okay, here are questions to think about. Here are things I want. So more processing, more burdens, more things to do. Let me throw a few more tasks onto Michael's, as if his day isn't busy enough. Will be to slow all that down and just track what are the things that are trying to invade your mind, almost like a conscious mindfulness. So when you go for that walk, you're listening to yourself. What is my mind want to talk about right now? Do I want to allow that to happen? Is that good for me? Is that burning energy? Is that giving me energy? Managing the energy level, managing the inner dialogue. Once we become aware of our inner dialogue, our brain almost kicks in. It's almost like we start observing our mind, and then that mind starts to change because it reacts. It's almost like we've pulled the tarpaulin off, and awareness starts to lighten us, starts to free us. That's a bit like what happens in therapy, right? We talk about things, we feel better. But we can do that in our own daily lives, just being consciously aware of the noise machine in our head and deciding, am I going to entertain that thought? Does it give me energy, or does it take my energy away? And just that one simple question, being aware, is it giving me energy, or am I losing energy? And making that conscious decision. That leads to efficiency.
Thank you so much. This was inspiring and fun, and at the end, it leaves me with a different way of thinking through my day, and I'm definitely going to change the way that I was expecting to take that walk, and I'll leave the earphone behind, and I'm also going to leave my tasks behind and listen a little bit more into what's coming in and asking myself these questions. Thank you very, very much for everything, and stay safe and stay healthy, Vivian.
You're welcome. And great to talk to you today again, Michael. My pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.